All right, MS-DOSX, let's get started for today. The half a dozen of you that are actually here. So today I'm going to talk about some specialized view controllers. This is pretty specific to iOS, but these are some special view controllers that are built into the UI kit that can help you build some more complicated UIs. So like I said, UI kit includes a lot of very specialized controllers. Generally speaking, these view controllers are going to manage other view controllers, and you can composite these to create very complicated UIs. And what's really neat about them is they give you a lot of really automatic behavior totally for free. It's pretty incredible how much work they take away from you. So I'm just going to kind of go through a few of them in turn. The first is a UI tab bar controller. So this you've probably seen a lot in iPhone applications, but it manages kind of a radio type interface where you have multiple different panes. The intent is that all those different panes of the application are basically independent, that they don't really communicate with each other. So a great example of that is the clock application on iOS, which has several different tabs. It has a world clock tab, it has an alarm tab, it has a stopwatch, and it has a timer. So this tab bar manages these four more or less independent tasks. That they're all individually they're probably not substantial enough to make a whole app, but together they kind of flesh out all the different things that you might want from a clock in this case. So a tab bar will manage multiple different view controllers, and you can tab through them, showing them one at a time. So just kind of going over some of the pieces. So the tab bar is responsible for switching the view inside that it displays, and it grabs that view from the different view controllers that it manages. It's also responsible for drawing the tab bar underneath the views and highlighting them and such to show which one currently has selection and that kind of thing. So each tab bar controller has a property called view controllers, which is an array of view controllers. So it's pretty easy. You just set that array create an array, fill it with view controllers, set it as the view controller's property on the tab bar, and it does everything else. It creates the tab, it switches between them automatically as the user switches between the different tabs, and it just draws the views as necessary, which is pretty cool. And if a view controller knows that it's going to be within a tab bar controller-based application, then it can access its tab bar item, which is kind of its little spot in the tab bar, with using the property self.tab bar item, which is a property on UI view controller. And there's the class UI tab bar item, which subclasses off of UI bar item, allows you to access things like the icon for that tab, the title for that tab, and the badge number for that tab. I think there's a bit more you can do with it, but that's kind of the basic idea. Is you can populate what goes in there from the tab bar item. Okay, so another really commonly used Apple-provided view controller is a navigation controller, and this provides the ability to do sort of a drill-down application that allows you to have multiple levels of kind of have a really multi-tier application. It manages a stack of view controllers and just shows whatever's currently on the top of that stack that you can push onto and pop off of. So a great example of a navigation-based application is Settings. So Settings there's this bar at the top. It has this what you'll learn next week or the week after about it. There's a table view in here, and you tap on one of these cells and it pushes a new page on, and it pushes another page on, and it draws this little button up in the upper left corner for you to go back to the previous page. So it'll pop back off of the view. It will pop back off of off the stack and show you the next one, and then you can pop back to the top. So the navigation controller is responsible for drawing that bar up at the top, which includes a title and a place for a button on the left and right. I think as of iOS 5, you can actually have multiple buttons on each side, but prior to that, it was just there was a button on the left and a button on the right, and that's what you had. And it allows you to push view controllers onto the navigation stack, and so you can see that the view that it contains is going to be drawn underneath that bar, and it just allows you to push them on, pop them off, and kind of go back and forth. Like I mentioned, it's also responsible for drawing that pop button up at the top. And what's really cool about that is that that behavior of popping off requires about 0 lines of code from you. It's done entirely automatically. So you don't have to intercept that and manually pop back off. That button is there for you automatically, and and the behavior for it is already implemented, which is pretty cool. So as with tab bars, a view controller can access its navigation controller. That if it's within a navigation controller, there's a property navigation controller on UI view controller. You know, that was a lot of controllers in that sentence, but UI view controller has a property navigation controller that allows you to access the navigation controller which contains that view controller, if there is one. And that allows you to push and pop onto that view controller. So the two kind of key methods on navigation controller that you need are push view controller, where you supply a view controller and indicate whether or not you want that push to be animated, and pop view controller, which will return the view controller that got popped, in case we want to hold on to it and maybe query it for something. Does that make sense? It should be pretty clear, right? So here's kind of an example of, this is, I guess, the context application. Doing a push, we'll do something kind of like this. Bring it in from the right and push it and kind of cover up the previous view. And then you can pop that view controller and it will disappear off to the right. So, like with tab bars, a view controller that's in a navigation controller can access its navigation item, which is kind of its part of the tab bar, of that navigation bar up at the top. And it includes the title and a button on the left or right. Usually you don't want to put things, unless the view controller is the root, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put something on the left because it's going to get covered up by the back button. You also can modify the back button, but it's slightly odd. So this back button here on this page is owned by not this view controller, but the view controller one level down in the stack. So the idea is that when a view controller you can set the back button property on the navigation item, but you're setting not the back button on the page that it shows, but the back button to get back to me in some sense. So you'll only see that if you push on another view controller. Does that make sense? Because it's kind of weird the first time you see it. But if you look at navigation item, there's three properties. There's a left bar item, a back bar item, and a right bar item, or something like that. And those three you can set manually to customize those buttons. Okay, so another really cool container view controller that Apple provided starting with the iPad is a split view controller, which basically is pretty simple. It manages two side-by-side view controllers, and Apple's intended use for that is what's called a master detail interface, where usually you have some list of something on the left-hand side, and once you select one out of that, and then the details of that item are shown in the other view. UI split view is iPad only. There's just not enough room on the iPhone screen for this to make any sense. Just wouldn't work. In fact, if you try to make one on a non-iPad, you'll get an exception right away. So again, another good example of a split view controller comes from settings. So this is settings on the iPad simulator, so there's not a lot in it. But so you can see that there's this table view on the left-hand side, which is all the different settings groups. And then when you select a setting, you'll get that settings list of customization settings on the right-hand side. So we have, things like general or Safari or photos. And of course, both of these view controllers can be any arbitrary view controller you want. It's fairly common for the one on the left to be some sort of table view, some sort of list, but it doesn't have to be. It's the split view controller, like a tab bar, has a property view controllers. You set that property. It's just an array of exactly length 2 view controllers, and by convention, the 0th element is the one that's going to be shown on the left. But so it doesn't care what those view controllers are. They can be any arbitrary view controllers. They can then be themselves, something like a navigation controller, and nest these pretty arbitrarily. The only nesting that you're not allowed to do is a tab bar can't be inside anything else. A tab bar has to be kind of at the root level, so you can't drill down to something and then reach it and then have a tab bar inside of that. Tab bars are only allowed to be kind of at the top level. And again, sort of the reasoning behind that is that the reason they have a tab bar is so that you can have an application that has several different I'll say modes, but they're kind of just sort of several different tasks that you're meant to do, and it doesn't quite make sense to have that within something else. The idea of the different pages of a tab should be pretty much independent, so there's no reason for that to be nested inside of something else. If you're going to have them be independent, have them be at the top level. A really great example that combines a tab and a navigation, for example, is the iPod application, which is at the top level a tab bar application because it has a tab for things like artists and genre and albums and that sort of thing. But within each one of those, it's usually a navigation controller where you can drill down from an artist name to all their albums, into an album, to all of the songs on that album. So that's a really great example of combining these multiple custom view controller classes. Going back to split view controller, it defines a delegate protocol, UI split view controller delegate, that basically allows you to hook into, for the most part, for a split view, when you're in landscape, it's pretty common to draw the left side right actually next to it, but when you switch into portrait, it's common for it to be hidden and to show in a popover menu. And the split view, the delegate method will allow you to hook into that and be able to say where the button is that does that, and be able to show it, hide and unhide it depending on as the rotation changes. So that's kind of what that's for. Okay, and then there isn't a class called modal view controller, but there's a concept of a modal view controller, which is basically a view controller that takes over the screen and doesn't allow you to do anything until you make it go away. An example of that is the bookmarks view in Safari. So here's our Safari window. If you tap on the bookmarks icon in the toolbar here, you'll get this table view with the bookmarks, and you can't do anything else in Safari until you make this either by selecting a website or selecting the Done button, making it go away. So a modal view controller is one that requires action right away, and you have to pay attention to this and make sure you do something, because otherwise it won't go away. And the way you put these on screen is any view controller can present another view controller as a modal view controller. And there's I think there's like 3 or 4 different animations that you can specify of how that view controller comes in. The default is to come in from the bottom like this, but there's also, I believe, dissolve and like flip to the back, so that we can have like a utility-based application where it kind of flips over to the back side. There might be others. Those are the 3 I can think of. So you can present any view controller can present a view controller modally, and then to make one go away, you just say dismiss. And this method works a little bit weirdly in that it can be called if a view controller is currently presenting a modal view controller and you call this, it will dismiss the view controller it presented. If not, if the view controller is being presented, it will dismiss itself. Does that make sense? It's a little weird. It's pretty common to put all these in the presenting view controller, the one that's doing the presenting, and then just make sure that it's responsible for making it go away when it's done. But it'll work in either case. So when you dismiss it, in this case, it'll disappear. It'll drop back down. Okay, and then one last one that I'm going to kind of tease you with is, and I kind of hinted at this a couple times already, is UI table view controller, which the basic idea is that it manages a list of information in a table. It works with the class UI table view, which is a subclass of view that manages this table, and we'll talk about this more in 2 Tuesdays from now. Because these are pretty common and pretty pervasive on iOS, so they get their own lecture. Because you use them all the time. I think that's all I have today. Okay, any questions? So when you okay, I didn't mention that. So there's a view controllers have a so view controllers have a property that I think it's called something like modal presentation style, that you can set before you present it, and then when it gets presented, it'll use that animation. So it's pretty common to, in Safari, I obviously don't know how it's written, but presumably when you tap that bookmarks button, it first allocates a bookmarks view controller, and then it sets some property on it saying, okay, I want it to be the go up from the bottom animation, and then it says present on that one. So that's how you set that animation. Any other questions?
For the split view controller, do you have to do any? So I mean, they're not the same size, and you can just switch them around. Like, do you have to make a special view controller that you've already designed for a right side of the split view controller, or can you just put in like a regular view controller and it'll kind of just modify the size?
Yeah, it can be any view controller you want, and it will call all of the auto resize methods, so it should automatically resize the frame to whatever size the iOS thinks is appropriate for a split view. It's worth noting that in iOS 5 they unlock the ability to have a split view in portrait as well, so that way you have them side by side in portrait. But that's not public yet. Wait a week and a half and it will be. Good question. Anything else? Okay, cool.